Have you ever experienced the sensation that your identity feels like a performance you can no longer sustain, as though the persona the world recognizes is disintegrating? Yet something deep within affirms this collapse as necessary. What if your ego's dissolution isn't your destruction, but rather the emergence of something profoundly authentic, something your nervous system has desperately needed and your soul has quietly arranged? The truth rarely discussed is this: your ego wasn't designed for happiness. It was engineered for survival. This explains why ego death, despite its terror, can feel like releasing a breath you've held for decades. But what truly occurs in your brain and consciousness following ego death? And how did Carl Jung articulate this phenomenon before neuroscience validated his insights? Continue with me, because this exploration will illuminate not only ego death's neurological impact, but why it represents essential medicine for mental wellness, and why the aspect of you resisting this transformation simultaneously yearns for it. We inhabit a culture where ego becomes casual vocabulary. Someone possesses an inflated ego. Release your ego. But what defines it fundamentally? Psychologically, your ego constitutes the constructed identity, enabling social functionality. It is the self you believe yourself to be, assembled from narratives, classifications, childhood conditioning, and social facades, most formed without deliberate awareness. Carl Jung termed this the persona, our public presentation beneath this facade. He identified the shadow, disowned fragments rejected for acceptance, validation, or security. The ego grips this mask desperately, perceiving it as survival itself, because from the ego's perspective, neuroscience reveals something remarkable. fMRI research on meditation and psychedelics, documented in publications like Nature and Frontiers in Human Neuroscience, demonstrates measurable brain alterations during reported ego dissolution. The default mode network, the DMN responsible for self-referential cognition, and your internal narrator exhibits dramatic activity reduction. This identical network shows hyperactivity in anxiety and depression sufferers. It generates thoughts like inadequacy, social rejection fears, or performance pressure. When ego dissolution begins through intensive meditation, breathwork, psychedelic journeys, or spiritual emergence, it transcends philosophical abstraction. It becomes a biological phenomenon. This biological unraveling manifests as chaos, because your brain equates identity with survival. When the facade crumbles, your nervous system responds with alarm. It resembles death, yet it isn't. It is the false self dying. What follows ego death after this psychological mask vanishes? Does permanent brain rewiring occur? Can ego death genuinely resolve trauma? How did Carl Jung describe this renaissance before neuroscience possessed terminology for it? We'll examine these questions next. Before proceeding, if you're passionate about consciousness expansion and exploring existence's deeper dimensions, subscribe to Fractal Wisdom to access videos challenging perceived limitations. Remain engaged through the conclusion, where we'll reveal practical methodologies for safely navigating ego death and channeling its potential for healing, creativity, and spiritual development. You've endured what resembles an emotional cataclysm, your ego, that persistent voice demanding narrative control, has quieted, perhaps disappeared entirely. You're uncertain whether you've achieved liberation or approaching breakdown. Here is the paradox neuroscience now confirms: when your ego dissolves, your brain doesn't fracture. It initiates healing. What emerges next explains why countless individuals report profound tranquility, lucidity, and even euphoria following ego death. Beneath identity's turbulence exists deeper intelligence, awaiting emergence when the default mode network quiets through meditation, psychedelics, near-death experiences, or intensive breathwork. Alternative neural activity intensifies. Cross-regional brain connectivity increases dramatically. Imperial College London researchers labeled this entropic brain activity. Essentially, your brain establishes unprecedented connections, like orchestral instruments spontaneously improvising together initially. Your self-concept becomes fluid, expansive, recognition dawns. Perhaps you're not merely your thoughts, but the awareness observing them. Frontiers in psychology research demonstrated that ego dissolution intensity correlates with sustained depression and anxiety reduction. Consider this implication: the brain essentially reboots. Carl Jung would identify this as confronting the self, capital S, the expansive, wiser psyche obscured by ego's fear-based conditioning. This transcends mystical metaphor. Genuine biological transformation occurs. Research examining long-term meditators and psilocybin therapy reveals increased prefrontal cortex activity, the region governing empathy, insight, and emotional regulation. Simultaneously, amygdala activity decreases, the fear and threat processor, post-ego death. The brain becomes less reactive, more contemplative. You escape loops of inadequacy or judgment anxiety, becoming attuned to present reality rather than mental fabrications. This sounds transformative, yet one frightening question remains largely unaddressed. If you dissolve the ego, what remains? Who exists without stories, achievements, or familiar suffering? Can excessive dissolution prevent return? Carl Jung's wisdom becomes critical here, warning that ego dissolution without integration proves equally dangerous as avoiding confrontation entirely. What constitutes integration? How do you reconstruct identity aligned with authentic self rather than trauma or conditioning? That is our next exploration. We'll discover how Jung's individuation concept provides the missing framework neuroscience is beginning to map, and how you cultivate wiser, more compassionate selfhood after ego death. This proves crucial because transformation without grounding manifests as chaos. If you felt disoriented during spiritual awakening or mental health journeys, this understanding may provide clarity. The ego has unraveled, the mask removed. You've glimpsed deeper truth beneath surface noise, and perhaps for the first time, your identity feels uncertain. This terrifies not because it is harmful, but because it is unfamiliar, like awakening in your lifelong home, discovering every wall repainted and doors relocated. The question becomes, what now? If the ego never represented your true self yet facilitated survival, how do you re-enter the world post ego death? Not as your former self, but as something more complete, aligned, and vital. Carl Jung termed this journey individuation, and understanding this may differentiate healing from fragmentation. Carl Jung wasn't merely a psychologist. He was a mystic employing scientific methodology. He believed human psyche isn't inherently damaged but layered. Peeling back layers reveals not emptiness, but meaning. He described individuation as becoming your authentic self, not others' expectations, not the people-pleasing persona, but the integrated whole, shadow and light, conscious and unconscious, all aspects unified. This journey typically commences after ego death, when we're compelled to ask, who am I genuinely? This isn't rhetorical, it is a summons to rebuild. Not the former ego, but its potential, a healthy bridge between inner and outer worlds, a self-heeding soul rather than fear. Neuroscientifically, this reconstruction involves neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity for experience-based rewiring. After ego death, neural patterns previously operating automatically, patterns shaped by trauma, social roles, or outdated beliefs, become disrupted. Within this disruption, new patterns can form, supporting this process through mindfulness, therapy, creative practices, or spiritual reflection. Literally reshapes how your brain processes identity, emotion, and connection. This explains post-ego death phenomena, heightened intuition, increased empathy, reduced thought identification, meaning seeking, and deeper creativity and unconscious connection. However, ignoring or suppressing this phase, attempting premature normalcy, can produce existential confusion, derealization, or spiritual bypassing. Jung emphasized integration's importance. You've seen beyond the veil and cannot unsee it, but you can construct new existence incorporating rather than concealing these revelations. Here is the revelation. Jung believed the self, your deepest essence, desires this wholeness. It summons you through the very breakdowns you perceived as destructive, panic attacks, burnout, creative blocks, identity crises. What if these weren't failures but invitations? What if your ego didn't die because you were broken, but because you were finally prepared to awaken? How do you integrate this awakening? How do you exist after ego death, having recognized old rules don't apply and new ones remain unwritten? That is our next exploration. We'll examine tools validated by psychology and neuroscience that help rewire your nervous system, reconnect with your body, and rebuild life aligned with your higher self. This journey doesn't conclude with ego death. That is merely the beginning. What follows is the genuine adventure. You've confronted the dissolution of everything you believed yourself to be. You've tasted the raw, overwhelming stillness following ego dissolution. But you cannot remain in that void. Integration isn't optional. It differentiates awakening from mental fragmentation. While ego death feels like an ending, what follows is actually rebirth. But rebirth requires care, intentional practices supporting your nervous system and soul as they reorganize around new existence. Here are 4 powerful integration tools. Tool 1, somatic grounding, healing through embodiment. Understand this first. Trauma doesn't reside in thoughts. It inhabits your nervous system. This explains why merely comprehending your spiritual awakening or ego death often provides no relief. Your body experiences overwhelm, unsafety, dysregulation. We must provide what it needs: movement, expression, discharge. This is somatic grounding. Your body is designed to complete stress cycles. But modern culture teaches suppression, remaining still, appearing calm, maintaining politeness. Yet in nature, animals shake after trauma. They tremble, stretch, vocalize, they release. We can too. Try intuitive movement or ecstatic dance. Move as though your body communicates. Shake everything for 2 to 3 minutes. Breathwork like Wim Hof or box, breathing to regulate your vagus nerve, trampoline jumping, cold exposure, ice baths or cold showers, reset your system. Stretching with sound, groan, sigh, hum, release trapped energy, chanting or toning, vocal vibrations, stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system. Barefoot nature walking, pillow hitting or rage rooms. Yes, these count. These work because your nervous system communicates through sensation, not logic. Granting your body permission to physically complete stress cycles signals your brain, we're safe now. Only then can genuine rebuilding commence. Tool 2. Shadow work journaling. Allowing the unseen voice. You might feel tempted to remain in light after seeing through ego, but authentic growth requires confronting what remains hidden in darkness. That is shadow work. Jung taught that shadow encompasses everything rejected or repressed: jealousy, control issues, shame, desires. These aspects aren't evil, they're misunderstood. Until you acknowledge them, they'll unconsciously govern your life. What does this resentment protect? What discomforts me in others that I haven't owned in myself? What emotion have I feared feeling this week? If journaling feels difficult, don't force it. Some people are more verbal. Try voice recording your thoughts instead. Simply speak them aloud as though conversing with your inner world. The objective isn't fixing anything, it is witnessing, because what you can name, you can integrate. What you avoid strengthens in darkness. Tool 3. Archetypal awareness, encountering your inner cast. This proves powerful, yet often overlooked. Carl Jung believed your psyche comprises archetypes, universal energies, or patterns appearing across cultures, myths, and dreams. These aren't merely stories, they're living forces within you. After ego death, these archetypes often emerge more clearly, because ego no longer suppresses them. You might suddenly feel the inner child craving protection or play, the warrior reclaiming power, the mystic trusting the unknown, the caregiver urging softness and service, the trickster tempting self-sabotage or absurdist laughter, the sage whispering truths in stillness, rather than resisting them. Dialogue with these inner energies. Ask yourself which archetype dominates today. What does it need? What truth does it reveal? Understanding you're not one static self, but an evolving cast of inner characters creates spaciousness and facilitates self-compassion. Tool 4. Conscious connection. Healing through safe human mirrors. Following ego death, your inner world opens completely. You're raw, redefined, more perceptive than ever, but also more vulnerable. This makes conscious connection among the most overlooked yet powerful integration tools. Here is the paradox. Ego death often leads to solitude, but healing doesn't occur in isolation. It happens in relationship. Our nervous systems co-regulate. Around safe, attuned, grounded people, our bodies mirror that stability. In neuroscience, this connects to polyvagal theory, especially the ventral vagal state supporting calm connection and social engagement. The right relationships can literally help rewire your nervous system after ego death. This isn't about overwhelming anyone with your revelations. It is about choosing intentional spaces where your emerging self can be witnessed, accepted, and compassionately reflected. Practice this through open-hearted conversations with understanding individuals, not to fix you, but witness you. Conscious community spaces like support circles, integration groups, spiritual sanghas, or therapeutic circles, working with trauma, informed coaches, guides, or therapists familiar with awakening. Even having one person you can text saying, "I feel different, can I share what is happening?" Because when your ego dissolves, it can feel like nobody sees you anymore, not even yourself. But being held in loving connection reminds you you're not disappearing, you're emerging, being met by another human while still forming. That is medicine. If you've experienced ego death or even glimpses of it, you're not broken. You're in a sacred in-between, and it is acceptable to lack all answers currently. What matters most? You don't have to return to who you were. You get to rebuild with intention, truth, and gentleness. These tools aren't merely practices. They're lifelines back to your body, your intuition, your authentic self. I want to hear from you. What aspect of your ego have you recently released? Or perhaps you're currently in it. Between identities, between who you were and who you're becoming. This is space for genuine conversation. No masks required. If you found this video healing or illuminating, subscribe to Fractal Wisdom. This channel supports your expansion, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, with tools meeting you where you are. More is coming, and you won't want to miss what is next. You're not alone on this path. We're walking it together.